The Recreant's Tale. Zinchiki tucked the pistol in her tactical belt and looked down on the bodies at her feet. The fight had been quick. With one guard on the comms, another distracted, and a third left to cover the three of them, she had moved quickly. Her claws had bitten deep into the unarmored woman's neck, and she'd used the woman's weight to sever the artery before launching herself at the second. Alerted by her first victim's strangled cry, the second lacked the time to train her gun before going down. They were only paid security, and the evening was a social affair, and she knew where to cut a Shilvanti. Her warband had trained in the proper technique soon after coming to Shill, and her first weeks at Shoshe Pan Technical had made her dream of little else. The woman had time to scream, if only barely. It had been a calculated risk, but it left Tsala and Letzi to deal with the woman on her omnipad, and they hadn't disappointed. She stood up to examine their results, just as Letzi slumped against the wall and slid to the floor. Her jacket had a blackened hole in one side. "Letzi!" Tsala stared for a moment before rushing to her side, pulling the jacket away. Zinchiki stepped over and spotted the matching hole in the girl's shirt. "That could have gone better," Letzi gasped, looking up at them both. "How bad is it?" Zinchiki watched Tsala's hands flutter over the wound before kneeling down to tear the shirt open. The hole was laid bare, blackened and ugly. "It looks like you missed anything vital, but you need a doctor." "Right. That's it then." Tsala shook her head and dug out the data chip, offering it over. "Zinchiki, take this and get out of here. I'll stay with Letzi until security arrives." "There is a medical kit near my extraction point in the kitchen." Zinchiki blinked, shaking her head in negation. "Get her there, and they can provide temporary help. Melondi and Indara have a medical team nearby for the ruse. Let them handle this." "Sala, she's right." Letzi looked pale, but she reached over and gripped Tsala's hand tightly. "I don't want to just lay here and get us arrested." "She can't travel like this." Tsala looked over Letzi doubtfully, but to Zinchiki's surprise, the girl's practical side rallied. "We need a bandage. The hole's cauterized, but it will open the second she starts moving." That much was true. Las wounds were difficult, and the beamer punched through Letzi's flesh with ease. Palace security had their guns set to kill, and a cold shiver ran through her from head to Asaic as she weighed their options. "Roll this over the wound and tie it around her waist. Give Letzi your jacket to hide it, and hold it tight." As battlefield care went, it left much to be desired, but she shrugged her top off and tossed it over. "It will hurt a great deal, but it should last for a short time." "What about you?" To her credit, Tsala shrugged off her jacket and was already starting to gingerly ease Letzi out of her own. The question caught Zinchiki by surprise, as it was fairly obvious. "Give me a few minutes head start. I will cause a distraction on the second floor before doubling back and—" Tsala seemed ready to argue, which was mystifying, but then shook her head and bent to the task. Letzi whimpered in pain as they tied the top around her waist, but otherwise stayed admirably quiet. "We can't move her quickly. What's on the second floor?" "I don't have time to explain, and you don't have time to argue." Which was preferable to stating the obvious. "You must go slowly, so with luck, I will reach the kitchen before you." Drawing the pistol from her belt, she regarded the woman on the floor as she began to stir. The ample flow of blood attested that the other two women were dead, but she checked her work anyway, then shot the woman in the head. Tsala's jaw dropped in shock as she looked ready to explode, but tending to Letzi prevented anything more. "What the fuck are you doing? Are you insane?" "I just removed the only person who can identify you both. The woman reported a furry alien with a tail. If she had seen Rakiri, she would have said Rakiri." There wasn't time. Even with Tsala clamping down on the bandage, Letzi might succumb to shock, and once that happened... Zinchiki patted the gun in her belt as she rose. "You don't have guns. If Letzi gets worse, get help from the guards. Tell them I attacked you and ran." Tsala glared at her thunderously, but she helped Letzi to her feet without wasting further time. with more to be said, Zinchiki blinked and raced up the hall without another word. Shulvanti buildings were a labyrinth, and the palace staff used a warren all their own to keep them from sight. The nearest was not far, and she was the only... Past! There was one other furry alien with a tail on the grounds tonight. She still needed to cause a distraction. She had promised Asala that much. They had come here as a team, and she owed them. Casting caution to the winds, she ran for the servants' stairs. With luck, the alarms would soon start. The Recreant's Epilogue. Agent Arisa Muifal considered herself a skilled and resourceful agent of the interior. She excelled in the art of blending into her environment, the perfect operative for undercover missions, yet being thrust into the ballroom suited her tonight. It was past time to do something about her superior officer. Kadira Zariva was as mercurial as Princess Kamordri, yet in the last few weeks she had become more than a thorn. She had become a liability. It was clear that the pair had hatched some scheme to elevate Kamordri to the throne, and just as clear that Zariva considered one Arisa Muifal to be disposable. Mercurial or not, the evening should have been a straightforward social affair. The Northern Palace saw its share of such functions, but with 2 princesses in attendance, to say nothing of every noble who'd been able to claw their way in, that put another face on the matter. Against all expectations, there was movement on the perimeter, and even with Indara and Kalira's details on site, they were badly understaffed. Even without her other contingency, Muifal considered the situation tenuous. There was every chance something could go wrong, and that suited her perfectly. Her call to Zariva had been strident, insistent, but factual. If she'd twisted Zariva's arm to get her down to control, so be it. In the end, if nothing happened, it signified nothing. But if something did, it would be Zariva who took the blame. Sooner or later, Zariva would have done it to her, and she intended to get there first. While not given to outward expression, a hint of a smile played over her lips as she entered the ballroom in her purple duty uniform. The crowd was interspersed with dedicated professionals who were leaders in their fields, while dedicated toadies turned a serious, dignified event into a parody of itself. The former looked out of place in the palace, but it was the latter who were intruders this evening, for all their elegant finery and polished manners. Muifal stood out, a member of neither camp, which is how she readily spotted the figure of Special Agent Lamana Davari, likewise clad in her purple utility uniform. Davari was recently elevated to family services, due to a combination of her skills and her professional achievements. Muifal had never met the woman, but events of the last few months had led her to gather what information she could. Davari was a talented woman, with a reputation as a dedicated, relentless, and humorless woman who brought down criminals through deception. Some even considered her cruel, but none of her informants described Davari as unethical or capricious. It was a different flavour of Muifal's own strengths, and she appreciated the subtleties. Zariva had sent her to handle the guests. It seemed like a perfect opportunity to introduce herself. She subtly glanced around the room, making eye contact as she approached. The crowd around the room parted to give her room as she strode over. Davari watched her come, her own nod scarcely perceptible, offering nothing. Both agents of the interior, they had been cast on opposite sides of this unfolding play. Or at least Zariva was. Muifal's uncertainty felt like the static charge before a storm. Davari might not feel the same, but it was an option worth exploring, and she had precious few options left. "Agent Muifal, I believe," Davari said, her voice low. "I've been watching you, Arisa. You're exceptional, and I believe you have the potential to change the course of things." Arisa's heart pounded in her chest. She had always been fiercely loyal to the interior, but recent events had left her questioning their true intentions. "Special Agent Davari, what do you mean?" she asked cautiously. The ballroom was large, but crowded, and Davari paused as a knot of scientists scurried past. "Your supervisor, Zariva, is becoming increasingly erratic. The Empress won't look well on all this when she returns. And you? Reaching out to schoolgirls so you could explore poisoning Kalira? There's no outcome in the universe where that goes well for you. Moifao kept her composure. Zariva had used her as the intermediary in that fruitless scheme, and of course Davari knew, which meant that Central and the Minister Raylan knew, which meant that the Empress would know. If Kalira died, Kamaldry might yet end up as heir by default, but it would be treason. There could be no greater crime than regicide, and behind the scenes, heads would roll for it. And mine will be one of them. Deeps take the woman. As much as I wanted to frame her, Zariva still got there first. I can't just betray my supervisor without proof, and we're all under observation, Arisa replied, her lips barely moving. The noise of the crowd would obscure her words, but there were always cameras. You of all people must appreciate that. We'll need someone inside when the time comes. Davari rubbed her cheek, obscuring her face as she watched the waitstaff parading in with the dessert. I'm giving you a chance to consider where your loyalties lie. With your oath to the Empress, or 2 women bent on Zarova's side. And there it was. The veiled offer and the blunt threat, straight and to the point. And what choice did she have? Kadira Zariva had no thought for anyone but herself. The unexplained absences indulged by Kamaldry, the erratic behavior, their ambitions were intertwined, but there was no room in those ambitions for Arisa Moifal. It was time to make a choice, and there was only one path left that offered survival. The shoot-to-kill order. That's still on Zariva, and no one can pin it on me. It might not even happen. I serve the interior, but I'm still trapped here. Arisa kept her words low, covering her mouth as if stifling a yawn. What do you want me to do? Remain on duty here for the next 3 days. Betray me, and the galaxy won't be big enough to hide you, Davari said, sotto voce before giving her a smile. It's been a pleasure meeting you. Likewise. I hope you enjoy the rest of the evening, Moifal said congenially. The palace doesn't get to entertain like this as often as it should, and... Frantic screams began to fill the room, as seated guests shrieked in horror, gagging as their faces contorted in raw agony. Around the room, there were strangled cries as the crowd began to run, desperately trying to escape as the smell of death filled the air. Moments later, alarms sounded throughout the palace, and chaos descended. The Chef's Tale. I am the Knight. I am also covered in Shilvanti blood. Armed guards are shooting to kill, and I am alone. Lex's fate was in the hands of the Dark Mother and Desala, but if the girls were clever, then all should be well. She was on her own, and that was fine. Being tied to the pair had been necessary, but inconvenient. Their schedule had been far too tight to allow for liberating anything worthwhile, but there were tourist brochures on the Northern Palace, and Zenshiki had done her homework. The second floor was a warren of art galleries, a proper treasure trove, if she only had the time. It was distressing to have lost her top. Aside from the tactical sensors buried in the vest, she was running around topless. All those useful pouches that lined the shoulder straps were lost, and she had nothing on but bottoms and a web belt carrying the data card they'd come for. Hardly any carrying capacity at all. On the other claw, she knew where she was, and breaking in had gone from optional acquisitions to creating a useful distraction. Thanks to her preparation, she knew where she wanted to be. Avoiding 2 teams of security had been simplicity itself, as they ran towards the chaos below. Things would settle eventually, but she'd earned a single moment to herself for this very necessary mission. Besides, she still had to get a gift for past. 1 ear was barely a treat, and without extra pockets she had nowhere to carry more. 3 women lay dead at her hands. Dark Mother, this will be perfect to earn my name from my Hahakt. True, there was the matter of making sure past was safe, and getting away with the data card, and neither of them getting shot, but having something spectacular as a gift too? She would sweep her male off his feet and take him in her arms like one of the great adventure ballads of old. Pedveri would shed her fur in envy. And she had killed. With 2 more, she would honourably earn her first kill ring. Pedveri and her mother might ask for proof, but she had a reputation as a dutiful member of the family. Young, yes, but no one would seriously question her word. She cast happy thoughts of multiple homicides aside as she slid around the room to her destination. It was perfect. 3 rows of glass shelving illuminated under gallery lights filled the room, displaying hints of gold, silver, platinum, the sheen of countless treasures. Precious valuables from all over known space were here for the taking, and her fur itched just thinking about it. All of this at her claw tips, and no way to carry it. Even so, she was here. "The kitchen gallery," she whispered in awe. "Come to mother." It wasn't stealing. It was here, and if she earned the taking of it, that was honourable. What gnawed at her was that for the boasting in the tourist brochures, the room was considered to be a minor collection. There wasn't even a map. The room wasn't large, however, and she lightly patted between 2 rows of antique Shilvanti ceramics and Helka's forks, dismissing them out of hand as she fretted over time. "Dark mother, please let past be safe." Zinchiki's emerald eyes roved over item after item as she bounded into the 3rd row, where there were no Shilvanti artifacts, and read the placards with growing excitement, dismissing them in turn. "Collection of platinum Edixi ceremonial toothpicks. Long as daggers, but useless. Human FIFA World Cup. Too big. I'll get my hahak done here eventually. Vintage Rakiri crab spear with matching pliers. It's 8 feet long. How big are their crabs? Set of decorative Rinil Ya knives. What's a Rinil? Silver Helcom carving Bichwa and tea set. Too obscure." She was eyeing a Helcom carving glaive when she spotted it. "Alliance, species unknown, pewter knife and fork set." The utensils gleamed dully, save for the glimmering garnets set on the end of each. They were Pezrin, a perfect dinner and dueling set. Casting around her, she grabbed a nearby bollard and swung, smashing the case. An alarm blared as she retrieved her prize and ran for the stairs down. "Seriously? Another alarm?" It was galling. Shilvanti often had no sense of priorities, at all. Even her hahakt had shown reasonable wisdom when he said, "Breakfast is the most important meal of the day." Displaying culinary antiquities as if they had lesser worth was unconscionable. Grumbling at such foolishness and gloating at her success, she listened outside the corridor before bounding toward the stair. Lingering at the door, she cracked it and listened and cocked one ear. Screams were echoing up from below, but nothing was close, and she scrambled down the steps to the 1st floor landing. There was shouting close by, and Zinchiki pulled out the pistol as the heavy steps of Shilvanti rushed past. Somewhere nearby there was screaming. It was a voice she knew. Her extraction point was 30 feet away, up the corridor past the kitchen. Peering at the door, she ran for it. "Food critics? Here at a banquet? Where? Who?" Her chest heaving, she dove into the room for her escape and fell back on the door, grabbing her aside back just in time as it swung closed, and listened. It was Burdin Dasari, her hahak's friend, and he was clutching at his chest. "Oh goodness, my heart! Son, get out there and see how bad it is!" Zinchiki plastered herself to the door and watched through its tiny window as a Shilvanti male she knew rushed into the corridor. She breathed a silent prayer to the Dark Mother as the boy turned into the corridor and walked past. She reached into the corridor and grabbed. The boy was Vadim, and after a muffled squawk of surprise, he was admirably composed. For a Shilvanti male. Admittedly, she had no experience of Shilvanti males except for the stories about Vadim's father, and seen him once at lunch. But civilized people did not waste time on conversation when there was fried chicken to consume. Shush! Be quiet! Zinchiki whispered hoarsely. She had been afraid the boy would scream or faint away, but he did neither. While his eyes were wide as family platters, he didn't struggle, and she slowly removed the hand from his mouth. Perhaps Melondi had chosen well. You may remember me. I am here to help Melondi. You're her Pezrin friend? Vadim trembled, but seemed to gather his composure as she released him. You've come to the restaurant with the girls a couple of times. Her psyche flipped in affirmation, but she nodded as well. It was likely the boy did not understand such matters. There is a boy here. A Pezrin like me, with black fur and gold eyes. Have you seen him? Well, yeah, he's been in the kitchen all night helping to set the dishes. Vadim stared, his eyes glancing down. You're naked. Half naked, and both of us have people we don't want hearing about it, Zinchiki said calmly, though her hackles rose and her claws flexed. She forced them down, though her psyche thrashed in frustration. This is a matter of life or death. Now, go and send me past. The chef's epilogue. Nesfa edged her way through the nervous crowd, waving her camera at everyone in the excitement. Most of the crowd had rushed from the ballroom, though the throng had split up in the foyer. There were cries and wails as people got violently ill, not by the smell, though that still lingered like a deep minder. The sights, sounds, and smells of others retching was bad enough. One of the few people warned to have nose plugs, she filmed the whole thing in loving detail, taking particular care to keep her camera on the royal table, the painters, and Professor Warwick as they reeled back. The meal had gone down well until dessert, but when people came to their senses, things might get nasty. There were already cries and screams about an attack, and one of the guards rushing past was shouting about terrorism and nerve gas. Outside, drones were whizzing overhead, and no one seemed to know if they belonged to the palace, or if something worse was going on. Uncertain what to do when held inside by the guards, the crowd huddled miserably in the grand hall, recoiling at the faintest whiff from the direction of the ballroom. There had been frantic screams when an elderly woman strode from the ballroom with a cup of the stuff and waved it around the room with menace. Spineless, all of you! This is just like my mother used to make. So much for nerve gas, she thought, as she captured it all for posterity. Mum will still pay me a fortune for this. She was filming the woman framed in the doorway, ostentatiously taking bites of the gelatinous confection, when Bree hustled up to her. Nesfa, where's Melondi? They're over that way. Nessa waved toward the nearby reception room, where two pods of death's heads had barricaded the way. Word was that Prince Adam had been unable to cope, and Indara was going to medevac her husband off the premises, though with all the confusion, she'd heard 3 different stories already. Ness, we have to get a hold of her now. Bree yanked her close before whispering into her ear. Jacksmy just grabbed me in the back hall. Leslie's been shot. She may be dying. Nesfa Roche was a great believer in the power of the written word, but she'd grown up in a media empire. She hefted her camera like a battle axe, and charged down on the helmeted woman in black armor who barred the way. Nesfa Roche for Meet the Imperium, requesting a statement from the princess. Right now. Please. Goddess, please, please, please let her be one of our death's heads. The operative's tale. Think Adam's alright in there? Therry knelt down by a boulder and dialed up the resolution on her helmet cam. The Northern Palace was nearly 2 clicks out, but the signs of a disturbance were everywhere. He'll be fine. It's all part of the plan, Slip tutted. Anyway, he's got Classy with him. They'll be fine. Yeah, I still wish I had a suit drone, she said wistfully, imagining the conditions inside. If this food bomb was half as bad as Adam described, well, it was hard to believe, but things seemed to be coming apart by the building, and she wanted to watch. The little flying cameras weren't standard issue, but she adored them. They fleshed out a battlefield wonderfully, and all she had to do right now was listen in on comms. Captain Biona, The team leader from Kalira's pod was busy countermanding the orders from Captain Medaya, the OIC from the Palace contingent. Biona was claiming she had full authority since Komorji wasn't in residence and her princess was, and what had started with bad feelings had gone downhill from there. Most of her orders had made sense, just keeping the pods out on the perimeter and away from the palace while hired security handled the guests. But when the old vet found out the resident pods had shoot-to-kill orders, she'd gone off like a pocket nuke. Unable to weigh in, Ferry had listened in most of the day. Now, with a crowd of nobles screaming over the comm lines, Biona's argument didn't carry the force of regulations, but still carried weight, given all the chaos. The earlier bitching and arguing was the kind of thing that soured relations between pods, but the kill orders were wrong, and the palace pods knew it. Biona took the moral high ground, and while Medaya didn't rescind the order, she'd backed down and her pods had dispersed along the perimeter with quiet relief. It hadn't lasted long. "Shame about that drone hitting the communications array on the roof," Slip chirped happily, using her voice mic instead of using the comms. "That Lieutenant Talo is doing a pretty slick job. Think the locals know whose drone is whose?" "They would, if they could get through to their ops room." Sel gave a quiet chuckle. "But let's not get used to having the opposition virus to the deeps and back." "Doesn't mean we can't enjoy it now," Ferry said with satisfaction, leaning back against a boulder. "Nothing to do but sit back and enjoy the show." Control, this is Pod 14 actual. We are under hostile fire in Sector 9. Repeat, hostile fire in Sector 9. Control wouldn't be answering any time soon, and the trio were already running as Biona and Medaya ordered the pods back to a tighter perimeter around the palace. "That's by the cliffs. Fuck! I want a drone." The operative's epilogue. There was still shrill screaming and frantic wails from one of the Shivanti in the kitchen. It was the head cook, who was dressed up like Dorothy's ruby slippers, and Tom Steinberg grumbled as he picked up yet another bag of dessert from the trash and threw it into his cart. The smell had been bearable for the first few bags. He'd had to excuse himself to the locker room to grab Uncle Bill's old gas mask, the one painted with the white skull. All the members of the Inquisition had a skull mask, but he'd explained his own away as essential for janitorial work, painted to look edgy. And it was. Essential and edgy, that was, though no one was noticing tonight. Tom heaved yet another bag of the uneaten dessert and vomited dinner into his cart. He was going to find whatever sick bastard had seen fit to pair fermented fish and durian ice cream, and pay them a visit from the Inquisition for crimes against culinary decency. There wasn't a circle of hell deep enough. Maybe even hold their head down in one of these bags, after it had been left to marinate in his trunk for a week. A sweet treat complemented by a palate cleanser, ending the meal on a piquant note. Piquant, my ass. A quick death isn't good enough for them. Tom continued this fantasy as he worked. He couldn't do anything yet, though. Right now, if the Imperial censors and whoever had poorly translated his name was to be believed, he was Thomas Stone Mountain, incredibly handsome janitor to the stars. Not Steinberg, scourge of the nobility, and the very last knock you ever wanted to hear on your door. The Thomas Steinberg who worked with death's heads and travelled the stars. Getting in trouble to stop other trouble was a different Tom. Truth be told, there were some bits of the janitor act he kind of liked. Bags of surströmming aside. Speaking of, he threw another squishy bag into the cart. And, oh boy, note to self, he was overdue changing the gas mask's filter. That was enough fish guts for now anyways. The caddy was full, and he grabbed the handles and started pushing. He was halfway down the hall when new alarms started blaring. Great, what now? If Tom had read the security light, he figured he should probably not be wandering the halls in the gas mask, but he looked at the vomit-smelling garbage bags. Surströmming was a special case, and, well, he did have a more inquisitive assignment. There were some people whose exit he needed to secure, and it just so happened they were where he was going anyways. Checking the time on his Omnipad, Tom beelined for the kitchen garbage room. Since the trash was the one thing they didn't check going out, it made sense to use it for the egress. He ran to the corner to the kitchen, using his momentum to spin right over to the bins. Right now, no one was coming near the place. He made his way inside and then he did a double take. Standing in the kitchen was a topless Pezrin. That brought back memories. The Pezrin had taught Tom that not every alien was a psychotic killer. Ironically, Tom loved the furry nopes, and he frantically tried not to stare as he opened the lid. The Pezrin girl must have felt the same. She actually blinked 3 times before gagging, but evidently the girl had been briefed on the plan, because she didn't argue and climbed down in the empty bin. Before she dropped down the hole, she stopped and looked at him. "There's another one coming. Another Pezrin like me." "Good to know." Tom got ready to shove. "Look, these bins are sealed up tight so no one will hear a sound. I'll get you to the drop-off before air is a problem, but don't move around, okay?" "Got it. Let him right in. There's a security port out for a furry alien with a tail. They didn't say Rakiri, so that means him or me." The girl slid down into the bin, and he slammed the lid just as the door behind him opened. It was the other Pezrin. This time it was a male in a bow tie, holding his nose. Adorable. Tom gestured to the dumpster, as the boy padded over before skidding to a halt, looking around as he frantically tried to cover his nose. The kid obviously didn't know jack about spycraft, much less the plan, obviously, but this was no time to be slow. "Get in the bin and hide," Tom hissed, picking up a garbage bag just as he spotted 2 guards walking into the kitchen from the door's tiny window. "Come on, get in the damn bin," Tom groused. He needed to get this done now. "Look, if you don't get in right now, you're going to be the special guest of some very bad and really upset people." The cat looked back at him in wild surprise, but Tom just shoved him in. "Not a bad ride. Big empty bin all to yourself with a lady kitty. Best case of cats in a sack ever." He took a couple of minutes to tidy up and move 2 more bins onto a trolley with his cargo. Just a quick drive out past the wall, let the kids out, then he'd walk back for another truckful. "Yes, ma'am, just getting it off the property as fast as I could." He just finished loading up when the door pushed open. "Hey, Tom!" One of the guards, Soletti, quickly walked over, gagging every other step. "There's a ferry thing loose in the palace. We got word there's something like, oh, goddess! Something like that down here. You see anything?" Tom just shook his head. "Not a soul. Is that what this is about? Some small furry creature? Pouchadillos aren't furry, but the little fuckers are all over the place." "Definitely wasn't a Rakiri." Soletti stopped. "Why is the trash vibrating?" "Oh, shit." Tom specifically did his best not to have a deer-in-the-headlights look. Thinking quickly, he added, "It's the leftover surströmming. This shit outgasses like a geyser when it decomposes, and I have to get all the dumpsters out before the bags start popping. Just ask any human." "Gross!" "I know, but you're welcome to check." He patted the cart welcomingly and opened the bag, which squelched obligingly, blasting a scented wave of odor, rotted herring, and warm vomit through the tiny room. The other guard, Tom didn't know her name, covered her mouth and ran for it. I still have to check, Tom." Soletti gagged desperately and just put up a hand as she crumpled against the wall, desperately trying not to puke. Orders from the top." The other guard was gone, but Soletti just had to be the conscientious one. To be fair, Tom didn't hold it against her. It was what she was paid to do. "Perfect. Oh well. Sorry, kids. You don't want to get any closer. Got a split bag already. Here." Tom opened the bin and tore a slit across the plastic while Soletti shuddered. With a noisome flourish, yellow slime and congealed soggy fish guts slid out of the bag into the bin, and he quickly slammed it shut, lashing it down tight. 5 more to go. Soletti's eyes bulged in horror before she ran for it. The cats in there were not going to be happy. He hated working with civilians. Pezrin, if they're still able to walk, I better run like hell when I let them out. The Lothario's Tale. It was one thing to be hustled into a back room by someone he didn't know, but at least the guy seemed to know what was going on. If it had been a woman, Pass probably would have balked, but a couple of words later and he'd already expected it. Zinshiki. He'd known it would be. Mind you, a trash room wasn't everything he'd expected, but once the screaming and the alarm started, he'd almost been unsurprised. Calm, even. Detached. What did you even say to a woman who sent you a severed ear? The chaos and mayhem breaking out all around him at least gave him small talk. Bundled up and bodily shoved into a trash bin by a human in a skull mask? Sure, why not? Whatever else he could say about the evening, it wasn't like he'd expected anything would go normally. And whose fault was that? He'd made up his mind already this morning, and deep in his soul, he knew it was all on him, and there was only one thing for it. It needed to be done, come what may, before he lost his nerve. So when the lid slammed shut overhead, and Zinshiki turned on a flashlight, he was ready. Well, almost ready. She was half naked. Sure, he worked at the type hall, and essentially raised there ever since he could remember much of anything. Naked women weren't even a novelty. But this was Zinshiki. He felt his heart and stomach trying to swap places as she stared at him. Past, Stop. He held up a hand as she reached for something, and gripped it tight. Not one word, please. Plutara, give me the strength to get through this. I have something to say, and I need you to hear me out, Pass said firmly, locking his eyes on hers. Most women might start to bluster, and while dissatisfied customers were rare, there were always a few troublemakers who wanted more than was on the menu. He braced himself, took a deep breath, and started again. Look, Zinshiki, you're the first Pezrin girl I've known in years. You're standoffish, quiet, and goddess. You somehow still manage to be so intense. I don't know where I stand with you, and I just can't go on with things this way. That is... I said not a word. Please. He looked away, which was not all that dramatic, considering they were stuffed in a waste bin. Clean, but still it wasn't what every boy dreamed of. I have to get through saying this, or I don't know if I'll be able to. He looked back up, and she blinked twice. It wasn't the number, but it was the way of it, and it felt familiar. He pressed on, mustering his courage. You sent me a severed ear, to where I live and work of all things. It's just not the kind of thing a guy expects from a woman. Her eyes bored into his soul, but he managed not to look away, as much as he wanted to. Losing his family had been the hardest thing in his life, but it was a distant memory now. This pain felt familiar, yet immediate, and he felt himself starting to choke up. The strangest thing of all is that somehow I know that I'm the weird one. Me. I'm the Pezrin not raised like a Pezrin. I don't know how to make this work, because I'm the one who's not what a Pezrin should be. I guess what I mean is... Look, I don't need diamonds, so please, don't say anything and just kiss me. Zinshiki was against him in a moment, her Asaya grappling around him. His hands went about her waist as they fell against the wall together. A moment more and their lips met. It felt as if the world moved, though maybe there was just the bin. So, this is love. A second later, the top opened as warm slop poured over them both, before slamming shut. The Lothario's Epilogue. Cardera Zariva watched Moifal as she stood outside her office, and checked her uniform before walking into control. It seemed like a frivolous nod to decorum, but the night had collapsed into a mass of misfortunes that would cast a nightmarish light on their work for years to come. A little decorum couldn't hurt. There will be the coming media coverage of the prince being medevaced in the care of Princess Indara, and footage of the milling crowd of angry nobility and bewildered scientists. The departure of Princess Kalira and the guests of honor merely left the staff to deal with the last details. Image control could come later. Well, at least our social calendar will be clear for a while. Princess Kamordri would have a fit when she returned. Here or not, the woman was vain enough to see this evening as a personal reflection on her. And what a joy that would be. For now she had to meet with Moifal. Early assessment of the evening would be useful later. Special Agent, Moifal said stoically after entering her office. Zariva kept the place empty of anything save her desk and chairs, for when she needed to be near operations. Moifal stayed at attention, and she let her stew, poking idly at her omnipad. Yes, Moifal, what is it? The last of the guests have been seen off the property without further incident. Captain Medaya reports no further contact along the perimeter, but her opinion is that whoever tried to infiltrate the grounds pulled out when she formed a defense in depth around the palace. She sent pods 15 and 16 to follow up. We have nothing on the free guards killed on the 4th floor either. So far, any word on that has been contained, so that's some blessing. We've kept a lid on the worst information, so the general opinion is that this was the worst kind of chaos. Zariva listened as Moifal rattled off her report with reasonable calm. It was one of her useful qualities. It would be a shame to dispose of her soon. But subordinates came and went. Yes, it was rather well organized. Zariva looked up at last to regard her lieutenant. The voices had been silent during her time in the crowd, but they were creeping back at the edge of her thoughts, like an angry susurrus, and she dismissed the woman, turning away. We'll meet tomorrow morning at 10. That will be all. It was short, sharp, and thankfully Moifal didn't argue. Whatever the woman's shortcomings, her stolid nature could be turned into a virtue, and she had other things to do. Casting her eyes back at her omnipad, she checked the app one final time, though she knew the codes were valid. Kerrigan Dorskulo had lived up to his end of the bargain. Not that his vanity had granted him any choice in the matter. Dorskulo Transit was a vital multi-system firm, and while their finances seemed questionable these last few years, their assets were still a common sight in the capital. In a way, thrusting the party onto Moifal had been good timing. She'd planned to slip away eventually, and the additional time had merely let her pick her perfect asset, a lifter with a heavy load that was coming up on its maintenance. It would be lean times for Dorskulo Transit, but Kerrigan's reputation would survive what was coming. And he was taking his son Akarun off planet, blissfully unaware of the news dogging his heels across the Imperium. Even when it caught up to him, he and his wives wouldn't dare to say a word. His ego wouldn't permit it, and while this would be damaging, the truths about his family were far worse. Heavy cargo drones were essentially faceless, their operation integrated into the planetary traffic network. Countless heavy lifters moved cargo from the spaceport, the units constantly on the move in a capital which never slept. Using Kerrigan's override codes, she reached out and took control of the drone. The Northern Palace really was rather isolated, leaving Kalira's entourage with no real options in their route back to the Academy. She tapped the pad, bringing the unit in line with her target. Everyone ignores drones. In a way, the chaos of the evening had been useful. She'd anticipated far greater difficulty inspecting the parking arrangements after the royal party's arrival, but planting the tracker had proven relatively easy once the pods were sent out. The devices were tiny but reliable, and it performed admirably. As if I didn't know you'd try something, Davari. This was almost too easy. She tapped at her omnipad, and was rewarded with a visual of the collision, as Cargo Unit 80102 violently ceased transmission.